Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We really appreciate you all taking time out of your schedule today to join us for this. We're going to go ahead and get started. So what we're going to cover today is embracing the new era, navigating the latest Citrix Platform updates. The agenda for today is first we'll do a brief set of introductions. And then we will, yes, Royce, I see that you raised a hand. Can you put a question? If you have a question, enter it in the chat, or I'm sorry, enter it in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to address any questions as needed. So we'll go through some brief introductions. Then I'll do about a 6 or 7 slide presentation about XenTegra to introduce you to those of you who may not be familiar with us. Then I'll pass it off to my colleague, who will then go through the latest Citrix platform updates that were recently announced. Then we'll cover preparing for a deployment of the new CVAD, Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops 24/2 LTSR. And then obviously we'll have time for questions, but feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box in the Zoom meeting. All right, so first introductions. So my name is Bill Sutton. I am with XenTegra and am the Director of Consulting Services in Modern Workspace. In that role, basically, I manage all of our end user computing, modern workspace technologies, of which Citrix is one, as well as a large part of the Microsoft stack. In addition to me on the call today, I'd like to introduce you to Jeremy Myers. Jeremy, would you say a few words? Introduce yourself, please.
Sure, Bill. So I'm Jeremy Myers. I've been at Citrix / Cloud Software Group, but I'll still say Citrix. So technically I'm in the Citrix business unit, but I've been at Citrix for 11 years. Anyways, I'm starting to hit that age, Bill, where the numbers are starting to get fuzzy. So, but I'm based in North Carolina. In fact, I'm very close to XenTegra HQ, if you will. And I'm actually no longer managing the partners. However, I have a very good working relationship with XenTegra, and but I manage ATSs, so that is the new name for the SEs. It's Citrix, and we have a bit of a focus, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, not only from a pre-sales perspective, but also from a post-sales adoption and more of a customer journey perspective as well. But I've got ATSs across the East Coast and as well as Canada.
Great, Jeremy. Thanks for that. So who is XenTegra? So many of you probably already know us. Those of you who don't, I'll talk a little bit more about what we do, but we are basically a value-added reseller headquartered in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. But we have a presence all around the world. As you'll see on the right, we have a nearshore company in Canada. We have the ability to leverage offshore resources in our Indian office in India. We have a SLED-fed subsidiary called XenTegra Gov, an SMB subsidiary called XenTegra One, and then of course we are an MSP, a managed services provider for many medium to large customers. So a little bit more about XenTegra, and again, I don't have many slides on this, but like I said, we are a value-added reseller, so we sell and support and implement major software and hardware technologies for customers. Along with that, we of course offer strategic consulting services. That's something that's near and dear to my heart, where we help customers design and implement technologies like Citrix, but we have a stack, as you can see at the bottom there, some of our major partners with whom we implement their technologies. As I mentioned earlier, we have a managed services division that is focused on digital workspace, but also can manage or does manage customer networks, customer digital workspace environments, as well as individual virtual machines and hosting capabilities. And then last but certainly not least, one of the things that we do for a lot of customers is we offer complimentary assessments around all of our technologies. So if you want to get introduced to us, we can do a quick assessment of your Citrix environment or other environments that you might have that fall within our technology stack. Our business model, I want to highlight that, and it's in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide. Our founder and CEO, his driving force when he founded XenTegra 2011. So what's that, Jeremy? 13 years ago? Hard to believe. When he founded XenTegra 13 years ago, he was focused on building a community and then serving that community. Andy worked for Citrix, and when he left Citrix, he felt like that some of the partners that he had been involved with while he was there just didn't do as much as he thought they should. So Andy felt like it was important to build a community of like-minded individuals, like-minded technologies, and serve that community. Along those same lines, XenTegra was also born out of a need for customer enablement and partnership. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. But essentially, this is about helping customers learn and expand their knowledge of the technologies that we offer and beyond. And we do that kind of as the XenTegra VAR 2.0 is kind of what we are now calling ourselves. We offer, like I said, complimentary assessments. We do educational webinars like this one, where we bring in a partner like Citrix in this case, and go through some new changes and other things that are happening in the industry. We also do hands-on workshops. These are typically done in person, sometimes at a vendor's office, many times at a hotel conference room, where we will actually allow customers to come in and partners to come in and get hands-on training with the technologies that we service and support. We also do a lot of podcasts. And Jeremy and I, although Jeremy has been absent for a while, right, Jeremy? We've missed you. We have the Citrix Session podcast. We record one of those every Monday morning, and they're typically posted weekly. So if you haven't seen or heard of those, go to XenTegra.com/podcasts. You'll see the list. There's a bunch of other ones that we offer. And then, of course, last but certainly not least, and this kind of comes under the customer enablement category of Andy's mission, and that is the heavily discounted conference passes. So we want customers to send their folks to conferences where they're able to. And what we have found historically is there's a lot of pushback in some organizations because of the cost of the conference pass. We typically discount these up to 90% off. So if you want to go to a conference, reach out to me, reach out to if you have a XenTegra salesperson, reach out to that salesperson. We can help get you hooked up with an industry conference pass. And I have to do the obligatory next thing, which is our Work Has No Boundaries giveaway. We've done this for a number of years now. Historically, we've given away a vehicle. This year, we took a different approach and decided to give away a vacation. This is to Hawaii. To register for this prize, it's a drawing. You just go to workhasnoboundaries.com, and there is a button there for you to enter the drawing. There are some small requirements, like you need to get an assessment or meet with one of our salespeople, things of that nature. But generally, just go to the workhasnoboundaries.com website, and you can register for our giveaway.
This is real, by the way. So I was at not this past year, but the year before, when XenTegra hosted, I think it was a Charlotte FC game, so the soccer game here downtown in Charlotte. And I got to witness, I think it was the ping pong balls, and I saw someone drive away with I think it was a forest green, or maybe it was the blue, I forget, but it was definitely a Bronco. I'll say that.
Ford Bronco, yep, it's a Ford Bronco.
Yep.
So this year we moved away from the vehicles and decided to give away a dream vacation for two to Maui. I believe it's Maui, but you can go to the website and it'll tell you where it is. All right, so we're going to move on now to Jeremy to talk about some of the latest platform updates. And obviously, once Jeremy's finished, we'll go back and look at the LTSR considerations. So I'm going to hand it off to Jeremy. Jeremy, just as a reminder, don't forget to tell me to advance the slides as you go through them. And if I don't respond, scream. So good enough.
No, that's fair. When my arrow key doesn't work, then it'll remind me. So I'll say something.
Good.
So yeah, we want to touch on a couple of things here. Number one, we'll talk about the platform updates. So from a couple of different perspectives, because this is pretty significant. Mm-hmm. So Bill, if you don't mind forwarding. I think there's a couple of themes that we want to hit on. Number one is there has been a tremendous focus on simplification at Citrix, and I'll get to what that looks like from a product perspective. But ultimately, what that means is, we're taking a lot of features, a lot of solutions that we sold as separate items in the past, and we're rolling them together. Now, this might sound a lot like Workspace, Bill. It might, we have bundled things in the past, but I'm going to argue that this is probably at a greater level than we've ever seen before.
I
So,
would agree. Yeah.
yeah. So, let's go to the next slide and we'll maybe pick that apart just a little bit. So I think there's sort of a refocus of the business. So as most folks may or may not know, actually, we were acquired by private equity about 1.5 years ago. And of course, there's a lot of questions around what does that mean for me? I'm a big Citrix shop, or I have been considering Citrix for a while. Anytime there's a significant change within a business, first thing that you folks ask questions, and I get that, right? So, what I wanted to start with is just giving you a bit of a roadmap on what this looks like for us, because I think two things. Number one, it's good from a product perspective, and I think you'll see that in a minute. And secondly, I think it's good for a relationship perspective as well. So, leading into this year, there was two bits that I'll get to. Number one is, listen, if you've been around Citrix for a while, there's been a tremendous focus on listen, we've had CVAD, we've had DAS, we've had analytics, more recently SPA. There was always something that, being very selfishly from a sales team perspective, there's always something that we wanted to go talk about, position, and see if it made sense so we could go sell you something new. And it's not that we're not trying to monetize anything, but the idea is we're actually going to step back from that a little bit. And I think what you'll see is, what we have now is more of a platform. Right. So we've simplified a lot of what that looks like, because the idea is, we're not trying as an organization to get quick wins. We're really focused in on long-term value that you get out of the product. Right. And the idea is we don't want to focus on things like sales calls. It's more of a relationship and really understanding what you own, why you own it, and how you can get the most value out of the product. So it might sound a little cheesy, but I'm telling you, that's how the sales teams are built now. I mentioned at the very beginning of this that, my team, they're called account technology strategists. We have a team that focuses in specifically with, XenTegra to help drive relationships with the customer through XenTegra. But, we're building relationships directly with our customers, directly with our partners. And the idea is we don't want to be transaction driven. We want to be partners with you and what you're doing with the Citrix products. We want to help you get the most value out of what you own. I think, when I was an SE, one of the first things we'd like to do when we sat down with a customer we hadn't talked to in a while is, you own this product. Do you realize what comes with it? And 9 times out of 10, most folks didn't know. And so it was an area where we could start to socialize things you already own and how do you get the value out of that. And so that's what we're doing in 2024. This transformation started about 1.5 months ago. So we're starting to get in front of our customers. We're starting to educate our partners and make sure they understand, because again, we're trying to consolidate packaging, we're trying to simplify it. And from a product roadmap perspective, what you'll find is there's a lot of investment in the product, and we're investing in areas that really boil down to automation as well. So it's pretty amazing. As someone who is worked with customers who are deploying to a cloud, they're asking me things like, well, how can I automate a lot of what I'm doing? Guess what? A lot of the tooling is built into it. So we'll talk through that a bit. All right, Bill, let's hit the next one. So one thing we've noticed, one thing our product managers have noticed is, there's a focus on how can I consolidate vendors? I'm trying to reduce cost. I am trying to do more with what I've got. I own way too many point solutions. And so we've taken that feedback from what we've got, and we've taken the breadth of what we've owned. And what you'll see is we've consolidated a lot of our products to meet this exact objective here. So, I think what you'll find is things that you may have paid for in the past are just included with what you've got. And the idea is, here's an area that maybe you can consolidate and collapse a footprint of vendors that you're maybe using for point solutions, down into, maybe a single SKU. The idea is, from an architecture perspective, having to manage different vendors and different product points, just from maybe the CFO being very interested in cutting costs, which is pretty important. And, like anything, I think, we've bought and we've used smaller products in the past. Maybe that's an area where we could collapse down just from a supportability perspective into a vendor who's got a lot of support behind it to help manage what you've got. Go ahead and hit the next one, Bill. So we've got a new platform that we're calling the Citrix Universal Hybrid Multi-Cloud. And with it comes with, many of you are Universal customers, many of you might be CVAD customers, some of you might be DAS customers, but ultimately we're collapsing a lot of that product stack into a single platform, single SKU. And on top of that, we're also including things like endpoint management. We're including things like application security. And the idea is, a lot of us have point solutions that we're running in our environment. Sometimes it's because there's different parts of the business that have introduced them, which is fine. We understand how IT works, and we understand some of the silos we have, especially in some of our larger enterprise environments. But what we want to be able to give you as a customer is the option to collapse down into a single vendor for several of those use cases. Obviously, we don't cover everything in the data center, and that's not the point. But I think there's areas where we continue to invest, and there's areas where you may be using some of the Citrix solution in a very niche use case. We want to give you the ability to expand those use cases to cover more of your environment. Understand that, for a lot of us, you need help along the journey, and that's where Citrix is investing our resources from an account perspective. That's where XenTegra is investing and working with us in the same way. So let's get into some of those details, Bill, and look under the hood.
I wanted to comment here real quick, Jeremy. I think that the takeaway, at least for me in listening to what you've been saying, is historically there's been a lot of focus on selling the new shiny object, as it were, the new software, the new version, et cetera. And this is really more of a focus on partnering with customers and not really getting into the game of selling new features and new functionality, although Citrix will, and you'll see this in a few minutes, has continued to innovate in the product. So this is really more about adoption and getting customers to leverage what they've had or what they have now. They have more to work with, and in these new versions, and the ability to really start using what they've purchased, which I think historically we found a lot of times situations where customers would buy a new product based on based on the pitch, and maybe just a very small portion of the organization would use it. And now we'll be more strategic with customers to help them get the value out of the investment they're making.
Yep, that's absolutely right. So let me be clear about this. Like, the core mission of Citrix has not changed. So if you've been around Citrix for a long time, if you've been, and this dates back to Mark Templeton, right? He used to talk about any, of course, we've had an additional any here. The idea is, we want to be able to enable any user to connect from any device to any app sitting on any infrastructure. Now, at one point in time, that was a data center. These days, it's public, it's private, it's owned, it's not owned. It could be up in the air, but the idea is, regardless of who you are and what you're coming from, you should be able to access anything to get your work done. Now, what's interesting is that doesn't necessarily mean a virtual app anymore, right? Didn't mean a virtual desktop. It could be web apps. So we talked with a lot of customers who are migrating to a new, more modern version of an application that looks like a web page. However, sometimes they aren't. I'm a big user of Salesforce. That's what we use at Citrix. And as it turns out, that's a dog of an app. So, some folks are choosing to deliver, web apps with Citrix, and some folks are choosing not to. The best part about that is we've got you covered there as well. Now, I think any infrastructure bill, I would love to get your opinion on this, is, I've seen, the adoption cycle across the board. So I've seen a lot of customers have been on-prem for a long time, and then the cloud blew up, and the decision was made, let's go directly to a cloud. So we picked, let's just say Azure, maybe AWS, maybe a mix.
Right.
And I've seen folks take a U-turn and go directly back. So we want to be able to support that for sure. But I think where a lot of customers are landing is somewhere in the middle, right? Listen, your infrastructure, your applications tend to need to live wherever it makes sense from a business perspective. So is it a cost perspective? Is it a security perspective? It doesn't matter. But, from that perspective, Bill, like, what would you say you're seeing in a lot of your accounts?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing a lot of is what you're just talking about. We're seeing a lot of hybrid. We still have we still have a good mix, though, of folks that are on-prem, and we've done a lot of projects moving their workloads to the cloud. But there seems to be a lot of interest in many cases for DR, if you want to call it that, or business continuity in the cloud. In other words, they want to be able to burst to the cloud. And that's something that that a few years ago was very difficult to do. And even back in the day when we had multiple data centers, it was possible, but there was a lot of considerations. Here, it's much more simplified in the Citrix architecture, particularly when you leverage the cloud. Citrix DaaS in particular. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of interest in cloud right now, really for both bursting and DR, as well as full-on workloads. And also a lot of hybrid.
So I think when you talk about DR, I mean, I think you hit on the pillar here, which is resiliency, right? And DR as a service or DR as an option, I do see a lot of customers leveraging that. So the idea is I've got a data center, that's where a majority of where my footprint sits. However, back in the day, if I wanted to create a colo, that was a pretty significant cost in a data center that was somewhere else. So I do have a lot of customers exploring, cloud locations simply for the scalability. The idea is I don't want to pay for it when I'm not using it, but I also want to be able to spin it up as quickly as I need to. That's an area that we certainly support. And obviously that plays right into flexibility. The idea is, listen, we support on-prem, vSphere, Nutanix, XenTegra, just about any on-premise platform we support. But then you turn around and go, we're supporting clouds as well. So it could be Azure, AWS, GCP, Oracle Cloud,
right.
You name it. Heck, VMware on Azure, we support that. Nutanix Cloud Clusters, we support that. The idea is, whatever you bring to the conversation from an architecture perspective, we want to be able to support. In some cases, it's performance. For instance, I could build out hardware on-prem that makes sense with NVIDIA cards, but that gets pretty pricey. What if I could provide that option in the cloud, maybe pay for it a little bit differently? You got an option for performance and you get to decide where that sits. I got to be honest, I got a lot of customers who are doing it for just plain Jane security. The idea that I need to be able to deliver applications and be able to sort of, sandbox the data itself. So, whatever the reason is, I think we've got a lot of bases covered. And ultimately, you need to be able to have visibility across the stack. So can I see the devices that are connecting to my environment? Can I see where they're coming from? Can I get visibility into my workloads, regardless of where they're sit? We should have sort of a single interface for visibility across the entire stack. So, that's the idea. And I will tell you that we are investing across the board, Bill, in all of these areas and sort of doubling down on what we do best. So over the past probably 2 years, we've started to peel back things that maybe didn't make sense. Certain things were maybe a stab at where we thought the industry was going. So I know we've talked in the past about workspace intelligence and being able to pull bits and pieces of applications, especially web apps, into that workspace interface.
Right.
As it turns out, what was more important, because that was about COVID time, was security, the fact that everyone was doing this from home. So listen, things change. We've sort of stripped back a lot of the things we've done over the years and honestly doubled down on what we're doing. And because of that, and you'll see this in the LTSR update we do here in a bit, is there's been a lot of innovation in the product and where we're headed and what we're supporting and who we're partnering with. And that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
All right. Listen, I didn't think I was going to stay that long on that slide, Bill, by the way. I wanted
Sorry.
to make sure that everyone understood that, despite some of the changes from the organization, we have not wavered from what it is we're doing. And in fact, we're investing heavily in what we're doing as well.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. When you talk to folks, they say that, hey, I'm launching something, but I got to go to Citrix, or there's Citrix this or Citrix that. But there's always been this other thing that has always been a part. In fact, I won't say it's always been a part of it, but at this point, we're coming up on 20 years. As we acquired NetScaler as a solution roughly 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And that has become an integral part of what we're doing. So when you think about what Citrix has done and what we do from a virtualization, quote unquote, virtualization perspective, it's been very much at virtualization. Heck, that was the first product we got off the ground. NT was 351, if you remember those days.
Oh yeah.
We ran, what was the name of that product?
WinFrame.
WinFrame. And then it was desktop virtualization when that was the big thing. And of course, Workspace app has had several iterations. At one point it was Receiver. At one point it was Dazzle. But ultimately, and then endpoint management. So visibility and management of that endpoint. Originally we expanded out to be a lot of things. Now we've sort of focused in on specifically Windows, specifically, Mac and Apple. But That's been a bit of part of what we've done. In fact, that's what most folks know us as. But for 20 years, we have also excelled in the enterprise ADC load balancing space. The idea is, we have a lot of customers that are sure leveraging the NetScaler to front end their Citrix environment, but they're also leveraging it to front end their enterprise apps, to load balance their enterprise apps, to protect their enterprise apps. And it's important to know that there are a lot of very large organizations with very big web footprints, web presence, that are all front ending that with NetScaler. So just keep that in mind as we talk through what you get as a customer in the Citrix world. So let's go ahead and hit the next slide. So before we do the money slide, so to speak, I've hit on this a little bit. I want to make sure everyone understands that, again, with all the changes, there's very much a focus on customer innovation. And what that means is, what we introduce into the product. In fact, all of my ATSs are engaging with their customers and trying to understand what is it that they need out of the product. So, internally, we have a pretty important RFE process. So if there's something that is important to you as a customer, we're capturing that and we're feeding that to product management, and we're talking to them about, listen, this is what's blocking adoption for our customers. Let's raise this RFE and let's make it important. And we want to not only, raise that to product management, we want to track that and ultimately come back to you as a customer and talk about some of the things that we've introduced in the product specifically for you. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, hey, we want to start painting NetScalers purple, but there are some things that are very specific. I had a customer reach out the other day and they had an RFE around a specific SIM. So, Splunk is a SIM that we support.
Right.
Log Analytics is, another one that's out there, but they had a very specific SIM that they needed supporting. We took that to product management. So we wanted to be able to take these bits of feedback to product management and ultimately come back to you and talk about, how we've worked with you to help this product in your environment. And that feeds right into the investment with your journey. The idea is, ultimately you're going to have access to the platform that is Citrix. We want you to use it. And we're pretty important in understanding not just how you use the technology, but how the business uses the technology. So how can we be a part of that journey, and how can we make sure that you're getting out of the product what you need? And then lastly, despite all of the complexity that makes it that Citrix environments just are, given the fact that we run on top of so many different things and we integrate with so many different things, we want to make this simple as well. Given the idea that, listen, we're telling you, bring what you need to us to support you. It needs to be simple to actually support. So let's hit the next one, Bill.
Yep, the next one covers the new offerings. So you want to dive a little bit deeper into what's in each one, and then we've got another slide after that talks about the subscription options.
Yeah, so basically the Citrix offerings boil down to primarily two different solutions. The first one is what we're calling the Citrix Universal Hybrid Multi-Cloud platform. The idea is it includes all of the virtual apps and desktops. If you're familiar with some of the edition versions that we've had in the past, it includes everything premium. So the Universal HMC license, as we like to call it, includes CVAD DAS, not only cloud, but also on-prem as well. So if you're a customer that made a transition from on-prem to cloud at one point in the past, you'll notice that that transition came with something called hybrid rights. And the idea was, as you're making a transition to the cloud, we'll continue to support you on-prem until you make the transition. Well, as we talked about earlier, Bill, there's a lot of customers that never actually make it to the cloud, and we recognize that. And the idea is, listen, you've got use cases for on-prem. You don't want to go to the cloud. That's okay. This license gives you the option to sort of pick and choose how you actually want to deploy, and you'll be permanently supported regardless of which path you go. Or, and this is what I'm also finding, both, right? So in some cases, especially with my very large customers, they'll take this entitlement, they'll carve up multiple license files, and they've got several environments that they're doing with that. But they can do that in addition to also support, the DAS instance as well. App protection, that was something that was always a part of premium, but not some of the other additions. Again, everything is quote unquote premium. You don't see it called out here simply because there's no such version in Universal. It's simply what you get is premium. You get, app protection, you get adaptive authentication, which is, a cloud-based EPA authentication footprint. It's powered by NetScaler, but it's not a NetScaler you necessarily have to manage. It includes endpoint management, so Citrix endpoint management, along the same theme as, cloud or on-prem. It comes in both flavors, although I'd argue most folks don't necessarily want to manage endpoint management on-prem. You've got that option, and it includes a pretty significant footprint of NetScaler as well. And what that means is you have up to, I want to say, 1,000 instances, and that's simply because we had to put a number on it, and a terabyte of bandwidth for those NetScalers as well. So if you want to deploy the NetScaler VPX, if you're familiar with that, that is a virtual form factor of the NetScaler. You get up to a terabyte of bandwidth to deploy however you want. So if you want to carve up 100 NetScalers, go for it. If you want to make them all VPX 3000, so to speak, you've got the capacity baked into the license to absolutely go do that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I want to drill down on two things here real quick, Jeremy, just to kind of highlight what you said, particularly as it relates to the premium app and desktop virtualization, the first bullet on the slide. I just want to kind of emphasize the fact that customers are not limited to on-prem or cloud. It's an and. You can using the universal hybrid multi-cloud license, a customer can have an environment running in DAS that's on-prem or in a cloud or both. They can also have the management or control layer on-prem and manage multiple cloud environments as well as an on-prem environment. So the capability goes both ways, all the way around, whereas in the past that wasn't the case. And the other thing I wanted to point out about NetScaler is the entitlement here under Universal Hybrid Multi-Cloud. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeremy. Is an entitlement for NetScaler generally. It's not limited to just remote access, gateway. It's for everything. So if you want to run, if you get universal multi or hybrid multi-cloud and you want to do WAF or you want to do web application firewall and you want to do other higher end capabilities in NetScaler, they're available to you as a part of that license, correct?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So the platform itself, the hybrid multi-cloud platform itself, includes essentially as many instances as you want. It includes, and this is for any use case, right? So unless you're an e-commerce kind of customer and you're serving up websites that, literally run, your storefront, if you will. When I say storefront, I don't mean Citrix storefront. I meant like your,
e-commerce. Yeah.
You got it. You can run it for any use case you want. So here's a way to collapse maybe your load balancing footprint into something that you might already have access to, you might already own. And so from a lot of questions that usually come up are, well, how do I get this? Number one, if you are a DAS customer, a universal customer, at your next renewal, you will just renew into the Citrix Universal Hybrid Multi-Cloud license. It's pretty simple. If you're an on-prem customer, you have the option to certainly transition to the same license as well. And we'll talk a little bit about, that in a minute. But, here's the most important thing to think about is, obviously the first thing, if I can predict questions, Bill, usually it's, well, I get all this new stuff. My price was this before. It's got to be this now, like off the chart. And the idea is it's not, right? So this is almost like a consumption kind of license, a model. You really only pay for what you're using. And so basically what you paid before would be very similar. Obviously we do a, renewal time. There's a typical uptick that you would normally see, inflation, cost of doing business. But for the most part, you're not going to see a tremendous uplift on what you're already doing now. But you have access and you've essentially unlocked so much more capability.
Right.
My job, my team's job is an ATS team. Bill's team, as a partner, is to make sure that you're getting the value out of that license as well. So we don't want that to be a barrier to you increasing your use cases. So, we'll meet with you. We'll go through this license. We'll talk about how you're leveraging things, and then we'll spend the next 3 years making sure you get the most value out of it. That's the idea.
Exactly.
Now, the second platform is the true Citrix Platform license. And the idea is it includes essentially everything that Citrix makes as a product. It includes, if you've worked with us, if you own secure private access, it's included there. If you own analytics, that's also included there as well. It also includes unlimited NetScaler. So the idea is this will give you everything, and it covers everyone in your business. Not only that, if Citrix makes an acquisition while you're on the platform license, you just get it. So here's a really good example. We introduced this platform license at the beginning of March, and I want to say the very next week we announced an acquisition of Uber Agent. So this is it's an enterprise monitoring solution that has been deployed widely. In fact, I want to say XenTegra is even a partner, or was a partner of Uber Agent, right? So now you're a partner of Citrix, so it's all part of the family. But the idea is, because you're a platform licensed customer, you automatically get Uber Agent. If we acquired something else, 6 months from now, you also get that one wall to wall across your organization as well. That's all a part of what that platform license is. So let's go to the next slide here real quick.
Sure, this is the bubble slide.
This is the bubble slide. So the idea behind this one is to kind of give you an idea of where most folks will sit in terms of what they own. I mean, we've got 3 subscription offerings, and most customers will land in the universal hybrid multi-cloud stack. This is what they'll own. They'll have most everything.
Right.
There are some use cases. There are some customers that will do Citrix for private cloud. Now, we haven't talked about that one, but that is a subscription offering that is essentially on-premise virtual apps and desktops. And honestly, we've got a significant number of customers who own, 25 licenses, 50 licenses, 100 licenses. This probably makes the most sense for them. In fact, the minimum order quantity for the hybrid multi-cloud is 250. So, if you don't have that much use case for Citrix, that's fine. We've got an offering for you, or even more importantly, I know XenTegra is finding a lot of customers who are just coming to them saying, hey, will you just manage this for us?
Right.
We're not in the IT business. We have a business that we run. Supporting IT is not one of those things.
Yeah, that's part of our managed services offering. We can host and manage it, or we can manage it in your own cloud or in one of the public clouds for you.
And on the other end of that spectrum, and probably around the same number of customers, will be the platform license customers who actually have the platform license. The idea there is it's enterprise wide. It includes everything. And honestly, in order for us to even talk about it, we really have to understand your business. Where does this make sense? It's sort of hey, this is a customer that I think makes sense from a platform perspective. They have the use cases. They're widely adopting with Citrix. I think there's some value in expanding that to some of the other products from an unlimited use case. We'll work with you on that if it makes sense, because again, you're covering in your organization enterprise wide. It's a little bit more expensive, but the idea is you get all the features, you're covering wall to wall, and for some customers, this is what they're looking for.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the one point here is under the platform license. I think you mentioned a minute ago, that's Uber Agent resides there, as well as anything that new that Citrix purchases will in all likelihood be in the platform license. But I suppose there's a possibility some of it could end up landing in HMC, some other actions. That's certainly a possibility, but the platform license is where Uber Agent lives today.
Yep.
So the next slide is focused, Jeremy, on the kind of this is the chart that everybody sees about, what features are in what edition. You want to emphasize any of these real quick?
Yeah, so the pieces I'll highlight, again, we talked about the universal multi-cloud. The important piece to point out is it is a significant footprint of NetScaler. It's meant for hybrid environments, on-prem cloud. You kind of choose however you want. The difference between it and the platform license are, number one, it's enterprise wide, so you cover every user in your organization. It also includes secure private access and some of those pieces. So if you're looking at zero trust, specifically for web apps outside of workspace apps, so this is using the enterprise browser, that's a use case as well. And some of our integrations from a SIEM perspective with security and performance analytics, that's also unlimited usage from a platform perspective. But hey, if those aren't features that you need across the board, again, we do have private cloud, and that is strictly, on-prem environment. So we're looking at highly regulated industries that, items must be on-prem. We're looking at maybe smaller customers that don't need, cloud, that sort of thing. That's included as well. But of course, we've also got use cases for fixed capacity NetScaler. So again, you have unlimited capacity with Universal, but if you're a private cloud customer, there's a very good chance that you're front-ending your Citrix environment with NetScaler. Again, we do sell VPX, we do sell fixed capacity hardware models as well of NetScaler. So again, these are all options, but ultimately we've simplified a lot of the packaging down because we don't want what you buy to be the, sort of the thing that hamstrings you in actually deploying within your enterprise.
Absolutely. So that's the last piece of the platform updates. Jeremy, any final thoughts before we jump into LTSR?
No, I mean, I'll just say this as a leader of the technical strategist, I'm pretty fired up about sort of the transition of this role, Bill. And the idea is, the charter of my team is really to invest time in you, the customer, and understanding how you're leveraging the technology, how we can continue to very selfishly grow that adoption and make sure you're using it. That's pretty important to us. But lastly, it's doing what you want. The one question I've got for a lot of my team is, if customers aren't telling you what it is they want out of the product and submitting RFEs, is that a sign? Because we want them really stretching the capabilities of the product and giving us feedback. So, I think this year I'm pretty fired up about and looking forward to working with, a lot of you who are on the call here.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we're going to transition here quickly into the preparing for the deployment of the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops 2402 LTSR. So LTSR stands for long-term service release. So before I get into that, Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, this is the on-premises version. So 2402 is the latest. It was just very recently released and is, I believe, available already for download. So the release strategy of Citrix is really about three different categories, if you will, as you can see here on the slide. So the long-term service release is designed largely for customers that are in kind of the toughest spots, the toughest verticals, like healthcare or maybe government, maybe financial services. But it's not limited to those. Any customer that wants a long-term environment that doesn't require a lot of frequent updates and management, long-term support, the LTSR is the way to go. Most of our customers that we deploy Citrix for today, if they're not in the cloud, they're leveraging the LTSR. Very rarely do we do a CR. Occasionally, but again, not nearly as frequently as the LTSR. Typically, as you can see, these are issued every couple of years, 2 to 3 years, and are very tightly controlled in terms of what versions of which components, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second, are supported. It's really about supportability and predictability. So there are releases that come out, as many of you may know, that are called cumulative updates. And those are typically released, I think it's the next slide has it, but it's a few times a year, about every 4 to 6 months or so, are the cumulative updates. And these are designed to do bug fixes. No new features are released in any of the cumulative updates. By comparison, you see current releases are released typically 3 to 4 times a year. I think last year it was pretty much just about every quarter there was a current release. And the current releases are supported for a shorter term, obviously, but they contain the newest features. So as you get a current release and a year and a half later, you upgrade to the next current release. Many times those upgrades are done in place, and we'll talk a little bit about the migration strategy in a minute. So the current releases are going to be the ones that have the new features for customers that want those features very quickly, and they have the ability and the capability to adopt and upgrade on a much more frequent basis. These have a tendency to be smaller organizations, but not always. But the majority of the ones that we see do the CRs, or have historically seen do the CRs, are smaller organizations that have the ability to quickly upgrade or migrate. And then finally, the cloud service, of course, that's Citrix DaaS. That is updated every few weeks, typically, and those updates are done, through the cloud service and are available to the customers immediately. Obviously, when you're leveraging Citrix Cloud, the VDA, the Virtual Desktop Agent, or Delivery Agent, excuse me, it runs on the machine itself that you're delivering the workload from. Obviously, that's something that would need to be kept or should be kept up to date when you're doing Citrix Cloud or even the CRs. But that's kind of the framework of the offerings today. Jeremy, anything you want to add to this before we move to the next slide?
Yeah, usually the question that comes up is, what is in scope for the LTSR?
Yeah,
So again, with the understanding that, what reminded me of this is you said VDA. So There's a lot of pieces that make up a Citrix solution, especially in this case, we're hosting pieces on-prem. So, things that are usually in scope are the DDC, of course.
Delivery controller.
The delivery controller, storefront, the VDAs, pieces like that. And then there are other pieces that are not, like there's not an LTSR version of WEM, the Windows Environment Management. There's not an LTS version of, like, say, session recording. So these are features that all come with it, but this is thinking in terms of like the core product itself. And what's driving some of this certainly is the posture of your IT department, but sometimes you've got enterprise app vendors that are sort of requiring, listen, we've certified on this version of LTSR, right? So in order for us to really support you as a customer, you need to be on this version, for good or bad. So we do have customers who want to go to CR and they can't because their vendor's telling them, hey, we only support the LTSR. And on the flip side, we've got customers who are, and we'll talk about this in a minute. There's 5 years of mainstream support with an LTSR release, whereas it's a bit different on the current release. I think it's probably 18 months, maybe.
I think it's 18 months.
18 months, yeah. So 7.15 was the last LTSR that went end of life, end of support, and that was back in 2022. And I think it's important for everyone to understand that 19.12 is the next LTSR that is going end of mainstream support. So just be aware of that. It's not until later this year, but we do these releases every 2 or 3 years. And honestly, most customers will do that because they get that long-term support, And I mean, some of us on the call here have been running XenApp 6.5 and they did that for years. 4.5, I'm not going to lie, I still see that every so often just because it's a platform that just runs. So to stay in support with Citrix, just be aware of when that goes end of life. And we've actually got a date coming up here pretty soon in December.
So in terms of LTSR to CR, we covered most of this, but I just want to highlight a couple of things here. 5 years of mainstream support for the LTSR version. Cumulative updates you don't get those with current release because the current release's cumulative update is effectively the next current release. The next current release. And then of course the release schedule, we talked about this, and then the enhancement requests or the enhancements are to the LTSR don't occur until the next LTSR in most cases. But given the rapid release cycle of the CR, you get the new enhancements every time you upgrade to a new CR.
So that's funny. So when we look at the release schedule, Bill, I'll just point this out. Now, most folks might not be able to see this, but the release schedule is every 18 to 36 months. That's a general rule of thumb, but we don't make the roadmaps public. Sometimes I'm not going to say we miss them, but what's the name of this LTSR, Bill? It's 2402.
2402,
The naming convention would indicate this is the second month in 2024. But we just released it this week. So sometimes even the numbering's a bit off. So
exactly. All right, so next we're going to talk about a few considerations for upgrading or migrating. We're going to talk about these three key items. This is by far not complete. These are just the ones I wanted to highlight real quick. Compatibility, new features, and the migration paths. So let's talk about compatibility. So this chart, something of an eye chart. I'm just going to hit the highlights. This is the operating system support comparison. So you've got the VDAs at the top and platform support refers to what Jeremy mentioned a minute ago, the delivery controller, the storefront servers, maybe the SQL server, and Web Studio, which we'll talk a little bit more about when we get to new features. But as you can see here, 1912 LTSR was the last one to support 2012 R2. So we do see a lot of folks that are still running 2012 R2, perhaps for an application reason that application is only supported on 2012 R2, or perhaps they haven't migrated it or upgraded it to 2016 or 2019. But you'll notice that the VDA support is there for all of the other operating systems. But you can see that obviously 1912 doesn't support 11 or 2022. The asterisk there for 2016, Windows Server 2016 and 2019 is important because in order to get the LTSR extent or support for LTSR on those OSs, you need to have Microsoft extended support because those operating systems are actually already end of life from Microsoft. So in addition, obviously, to the support for the platform items, there's also been a significant expansion, in my view, of Linux VDA support. I can remember, Jeremy, not that long ago, it was only 1 or 2. And here we've got 7 different flavors of Linux that are now supported for the VDA.
Yeah, there's a lot of use case for
Yep.
Linux, especially these days. So it used to be, I'll be honest, maybe oil and gas. So a lot of
Yep.
a lot of customers around the Gulf of Mexico, any of the oil companies, they're the ones using Linux. But I see this a lot in dev environments for sure. Actually, I started to see it in universities, so they would serve this up in a lot of university environments. But I think a lot of customers are starting to develop, next generation web apps, and they're doing this with Kubernetes. They're doing this with Docker, and Linux is the traditional use case for that. So they've been leveraging Linux for that platform. Oddly enough, and I'm not sure if this is an LTSR feature, but it's probably not because it's a new feature. We've also extended Mac OS support, just generally speaking, in the product that's coming. There's a tech preview. So much in the same way that you could remote PC to a Windows endpoint, now you can remote PC to a Mac OS endpoint as well. So I've got offshore developers that need to develop on a Mac because either they're developing Mac apps or maybe in lieu of the Linux VDA, they want to leverage that because again, it's some flavor of BSD under the hood. They're doing the same thing, but a lot of dev use cases.
Yeah, so let's be clear. When you talk about Mac, you're talking about remote PC, not a VDA or virtual desktop running the Mac OS, right?
Let me be very clear. You're absolutely right, because there was a Synergy video
It
from many,
was.
many
That's
years
what
ago where it was a virtual instance of Mac OS. That's not the case. There is a instance of Mac running on Apple hardware,
Right.
maybe a Mac Mini, maybe a laptop sitting in someone's cubicle, but it's a remote PC use case to that. You're correct.
Gotcha. All right. Still on compatibility. Quickly want to talk about this. We kind of touched on it, but I put this slide in here primarily because of what's at the bottom. And that is the databases, just to make it clear that 2016 SQL Server and forward are all supported with 2402 LTSR. Again, 2016, 2019 are supported, but our recommendation would be that you look at 2022 because the others are past end of life. All right, I want to talk next about new features. These are key enhancements, and this is definitely a eye chart. Apologies, but I'm going to highlight some of these that I think are important. And Jeremy, I'm sure will also point out some. So under the category of workload and device flexibility, the ability to leverage, those of you who have know and love the artist known as provisioning server, is now available to run on Azure and GCP, so you can run PVS in the cloud, as well as support for non-domain joined virtual machines. That may seem like something you wouldn't want to do, but we've actually done 2 projects in the past year. Jeremy's familiar with one of them, where we actually had a customer that had non-domain joined VMs that were able to leverage Citrix DAS.
Real quick, hey Bill, real quick on that one. That was an interesting
yeah.
use case because we talk about non-domain joined machines, but I mean literally they didn't have AD. Their use case was we had Okta, or we had, I can't remember who the IDP was, but
Google.
we had Google. That's what it was. We had Google, and we had these VMs. Hard stop.
Right.
And so we ended up making that work with, if I remember right, profile management. So that was interesting too.
We did. Yeah, another key thing here under the workload device flexibility is support for Windows 10 and 11 multi-session in Azure. This is what a lot of folks refer to as AVD, but there is full support for that. I wanted to touch on a couple of others.
Real quick on that one. Sometimes, Bill, I forget that this has been in DAS for the longest time, or some of the other stacks. It's even current release, right? So sometimes the features that come to LTSR are a little bit delayed. Again, they're trying to, from a stability perspective.
When I first read this list, I'm like, what? This has been there for a while, and then it dawned on me. Okay, we're talking about 2 years ago that when the last LTSR was released. Another one I wanted to touch on in the next category, operational and IT efficiency, is Web Studio for on-premises. So for those of you that are on 2203 LTSR, you know and love the MMC that's been around forever. Well, guess what? In 2402, as well as some of the current releases, there is Web Studio, which is very similar to what you see in DAS. If you've ever seen the DAS console, essentially it's a web server that's going to allow you to manage your CVAD environment on-prem. So this is a big change that's been made in this LTSR. But to Jeremy's point, it's been in some of the CRs, back a few, 6 or 8, 12 months.
But the the learning curve on Web Studio is pretty small. I mean, it looks modern, but at the same time, everything is in the same spot. The workflows are exactly the same. It just doesn't look like a UI that's been around for 20 years.
Yeah,
which is Windows 2000 is when we introduced MMCs. Yep.
Yep. So I'm not going to hit on all of these. We'll make sure that we'll have a copy of the recording and can obviously see these or find them on the web. Under security and compliance session, there have been a lot of enhancements to session recording, secure private access, WEM, and other key elements. And then under the category of end user experience, the Citrix Workspace app has a completely new user interface. And what's called the activity manager. They'll actually show you what applications or desktops you actually currently have open in the environment, and then you can switch between them. There's also been a lot of support, a lot of advancements or enhancements around Teams, blurring. This was something that a lot of folks asked for a few years ago. I know I did. That's available, of course, in the 2402 LTSR as well.
You know, of everything on the list here, Bill, I'm not going to lie, Teams background blurring was probably one of the biggest.
Yeah, I know.
You could run a VDA on the moon, and what was more important was being able to blur that background, which is
says the guy who doesn't have a blurred background, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, we won't get into that. It cuts my head off. The other thing that I think is interesting, and this is a little bit of an insight into where I see, I cover quite a few customers now, and I've been surprised how many folks I bump into. They're looking for ways to automate the deployment of their Citrix environments. And so the fact that we've added the Terraform provider, by the way, it's been around on the NetScaler side for some time, but there's an actual Terraform provider for the Citrix piece, the virtualization piece. I think we released it last November. I think they started out with some of the core components, like a DDC, the VDA, things like that. But it's constantly being, updated as well. It's pretty slick.
Yep. All right. In the interest of time, I want to move on to the migration paths. Put together a couple of them here. First, one of the migration paths. There are really two of them: an in-place upgrade or a migration, a parallel migration. So when it comes to the in-place upgrade, we don't recommend that. That is, XenTegra doesn't recommend an in-place upgrade in most cases because it involves obviously upgrading the existing production environment. If you choose to go that direction, we do, of course, recommend extensive testing. Ideally, you'll have a test environment where you can test an in-place upgrade. Obviously, take snapshots for rollback. This is critical if you're doing an in-place upgrade. The challenge with snapshots, at least in my experience, has been you can take a snapshot and you can easily roll back. But remember, when you do an in-place upgrade of CVAD or pretty much any software that depends on a database, once you've got it upgraded, it's going to have to upgrade the database. And if there's some problem during that upgrade, rolling back that VM isn't going to fix the database. You're going to have to make sure you snapshotted the database as well, or backed it up, or something along those lines.
I'll be honest, Bill, I've seen that more than once where, I'll talk to a customer who has backed up, they've snapshotted DDC, they snapshotted, some of the other components, but did do that on the database. So that's almost thing number one. Yep.
And obviously when you do an in-place upgrade, it may require downtime or obviously a maintenance window for you to do that, because it's going to literally there's ways to do an in-place upgrade that can minimize downtime by doing, one DDC and then bringing it back up and then doing the next DDC, but you still got that database upgrade.
Well, I know we got 2 minutes, but the other piece too is a lot of times customers, as a part of this upgrade, are also swapping out the OS, even the database version as well. Yes. So the in-place seems to make sense specifically for LTSR, just given some of the platform updates too. Yeah.
And then the other option that I mentioned is the migration, the parallel migration. This is what we see most often at XenTegra. Most customers, what we recommend, as you can see at the bottom. So this is where you build a full independent parallel environment. You have new DDCs, new storefront servers, potentially some and other components, obviously, that may need to be in the environment. This, of course, requires more infrastructure and may require changes to the firewall or the VLANs or other sorts of things that might be involved. Generally does not require downtime because you're literally building another environment beside the other one. They don't really have anything to do with one another unless you want them to. So consequently, it's less risky and has little impact to your end users. When you do the cutover, it may be simple as pointing them to a new URL. It may be a DNS change. That takes them over. You may have a new URL and send users, categories of users over at different times. And the other another thing is that it allows for the cleanup of unused settings or policies. So you may have GPOs that have been on that environment for years, and you've just been moving them over, and this gives everyone an opportunity to clean things up Any other final thoughts on that, Jeremy?
Yeah, so I've seen folks use the automated config tool to migrate between
Yep.
environments as well. So maybe you don't want to pull everything out, but you want to pull the policies out.
Right.
So there's some ways to migrate some things over as a part of this process as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. The automated config tool is something Citrix has that allows you to very easily migrate things like delivery groups, or I'm sorry, like applications, users that are associated with delivery groups, and as well as settings and policies, so that you don't have to, spend hours creating, the same policy in the new environment. So definitely an advantage to looking at that. Well, that's all we've got for today, folks. Thank you very much for joining. Jeremy, I'm surprised doesn't look like we had any questions posted in the Q&A and nothing in the chat. So I guess what I'll say is thank you for spending time with us today. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or Jeremy. I'm bill.sutton@XenTegra.com. Or your XenTegra salesperson. We'd be happy to work with you. Would love to work with you and help you with your migration or help you understand more about the new changes to Citrix. But thank you so much for joining us. Any final words, Jeremy?
No, listen, reach out to your account team, reach out to XenTegra. Yeah. We are happy to help deep dive into any of the things you saw today. Happy to help.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Again, have a great day and a nice weekend. See you later.